Hello and welcome. Beneath the ruins of fallen Waterdeep, wrapped in shadows that predate memory itself, a circlet of bone whispers with the voice of a dead god. The crown of horns carries within its twisted frame not merely enchantments or curses, but the entire consciousness of Myrkul, the Lord of Bones, the White-Handed, the Reaper. You have perhaps heard fragments of this tale before, whispered in taverns or scrawled in the margins of ancient tomes. But tonight, we trace the complete history of one of Faerun's most terrifying artifacts. This is not simply a story about a magical crown. This is the chronicle of how ambition, death, and divine power became inseparably fused into an object that transforms every soul brave enough or foolish enough to place it upon their head. Through the ages, the crown has claimed wizards, warriors, priests, and princes, drawing them into its web of corruption with promises of eternal power, while slowly devouring everything that made them human. The crown of horns represents the paradox at the heart of necromantic ambition. Those who seek to escape death inevitably become its greatest servants, and those who would master mortality find themselves enslaved to it in ways more absolute than any living being could comprehend. The artifact exists as proof that godhood itself offers no escape from consequence, that even divine beings can be reduced to fragments, imprisoned within relics that outlast their glory. As we descend into this exploration, you will come to understand not just what the crown is, but what it reveals about the nature of power, mortality, and the terrible price of refusing to accept death's embrace. Let us begin where all such tales must, with a mortal man who believed himself destined for something greater than the grave. Myrkul did not start his existence as a god, or even as an undead horror. He entered the world as Myrkul Bey al-Kursi, Crown Prince of Myrgum, a kingdom nestled in the eastern reaches of Faerun, where the living and dead existed in uneasy proximity. Born into nobility with the full title Crown Prince, Myrkul possessed every advantage mortal life could offer. Wealth, status, education, and the promise of a throne all lay within his grasp. Yet from his earliest years, the prince demonstrated an unsettling fascination with death that went far beyond the morbid curiosity common among young nobles. Historical accounts describe him as a reticent and withdrawn individual, his thin frame and gangly limbs hidden behind dark robes, speaking in a high-pitched but soft voice. Where other children of privilege learned statecraft and military strategy, Myrkul spent his time studying the necromantic arts, developing skills that would eventually carry him far beyond the confines of his princedom. As Myrkul matured, his interest in death transformed from academic curiosity into obsessive pursuit. He became a powerful, adventuring necromancer, though the specific details of his early magical education remain lost to the fragmentary records from that distant era. The magic came easily to him, as though some fundamental aspect of his being resonated with the negative energy that powered undead existence. He discovered he could not only raise corpses, but also command them with authority that exceeded typical necromantic control. This ability proved useful for his growing ambitions, as the prince understood that mortal power, even royal power, remained fundamentally limited. Even if he inherited the throne of Mrykul, even if he expanded his kingdom's borders through conquest and diplomacy, he would eventually succumb to age or assassination. The answer, as Myrkul eventually discovered, lay in godhood itself. He learned through his research that deities were not necessarily eternal beings who had always existed in their divine state. Some gods had ascended from mortal origins, achieving apotheosis through acts of tremendous power, or through claiming the domains of existing deities. The more Myrkul investigated this possibility, the more convinced he became that ascension represented the only logical solution to mortality's problem. If he could become a god, he would exist beyond death's reach, wielding power that persisted across centuries and commanding domains that shaped reality itself. Myrkul's path to divinity began when he abandoned his claim to Mrgum's throne and departed the kingdom entirely, dedicating himself completely to the pursuit of godhood. Traveling as an adventurer and necromancer, the former prince sought knowledge throughout the realms, though specific details of his journeys during this period remain sparse in historical records. His studies revealed that godhood required not just power, but also worshippers, individuals whose faith and devotion generated the divine energy that sustained a deity's existence. A god without worshippers inevitably faded, diminishing until nothing remained but a name in forgotten texts. During his travels, which scholars place circa the shadowed age of ancient Netheril, Myrkul encountered two other individuals whose ambitions mirrored his own. The first called himself Bane, a mortal who sought dominion over all forms of tyranny and domination. The second went by Baal, a calculating individual who had elevated murder and assassination into refined practices, and believed death itself should answer to his command. The three recognized in each other kindred spirits, individuals willing to sacrifice anything and destroy anyone who stood between them and ultimate power. They formed an alliance, agreeing to pool their knowledge and resources in pursuit of ascension. Together, they possessed skills that complemented each other perfectly. Bane understood the mechanics of domination and control. Baal had mastered the infliction of death in all its forms, and Myrkul commanded necromancy and understood the philosophical underpinnings of mortality itself. The three dedicated adventurers scoured the realms for power and information to bring them closer to godhood. In the year of Sycophants, negative 357 Dale reckoning, they achieved a significant breakthrough. They led a coalition of forces drawn from the Moonsea north and slew Meram of the Great Spear, one of the 7 lost gods, at the monument of the ancients in the frozen forest. This act granted them some measure of divine power, proving that godhood could indeed be claimed through mortal action. Having gained this foothold, they embarked into the Grey Waste, fighting through legions of undead until they stood before Mrykul, the ancient lord of the end of everything, who commanded absolute dominion over death, the dead, and everything connected to mortality. According to the legends, Mrykul had ruled as the sole god of death since time immemorial, accumulating such vast power that no other deity dared challenge his authority. Yet despite this tremendous might, Mrykul had grown weary of his responsibilities. The endless cycle of death and judgment, the infinite procession of souls requiring his attention, had stripped away whatever satisfaction he once derived from divine existence. The ancient god had indeed grown tired of his reign, and to the surprise of the 3 mortals standing before him, freely agreed to hand over his dominion of the underworld. The division of Mrkul's power came down to a game. As the 3 could not decide who among them would sit upon the throne of the dead, they left the decision to chance with a game of knucklebones. Bane emerged the winner and declared himself ruler for all eternity as the ultimate tyrant, claiming dominion over tyranny, hatred, and fear. Baal claimed authority over murder and violent death, ascending as the deity worshipped by assassins and those who dealt death for pleasure or profit. Myrkul, having come in second place in the game, made what seemed to some the shrewdest choice. He ascended as the Lord of the Dead, ruler of the underworld, commanding the domain of death itself, specifically decay, exhaustion, and the fear of dying. The former crown prince of Mrykul had achieved his goal, transcending mortality to become master of one of existence's fundamental forces. For thousands of years, Mrykul maintained his divine status through careful cultivation of worship and strategic positioning within Faerun's complex pantheon. He established churches throughout the realm, particularly in regions where death held cultural significance. His priests taught that mortality represented the natural order, that attempting to extend life through magic or medicine constituted an affront to cosmic law. They performed funerary rites that guided souls to their final destinations, while simultaneously spreading fear of what awaited those who defied death's embrace. The god himself manifested rarely, preferring to work through intermediaries and to cultivate an aura of inevitability rather than direct intervention. He wanted mortals to view death as an unavoidable conclusion, rather than an enemy that could be fought or negotiated with. During this period of divine existence, Myrkul would eventually acquire an artifact that would become his final legacy and his method of resurrection. The crown of horns originated not from the god himself, but from the dying days of ancient Netheril, that floating empire of archmages whose hubris eventually precipitated their complete annihilation. In the year -2267 Dale Reckoning, an archwizard named Treb founded the Netherese enclave of Shadowtop Burrow, establishing it as a center for magical research and trade. This could imply that Treb had grand ambitions for his enclave, though the specific nature of his research programs during the founding years remains unrecorded in available sources. The crown itself came into existence through catastrophe rather than careful planning. Treb attempted to create an artifact of tremendous necromantic power, though records from this period are fragmentary at best, and the exact date of the crown's creation remains uncertain, occurring sometime after the enclave's founding. Based on what we know about Netherese magical practices, we can assume Treb sought to push the boundaries of what artifacts could accomplish, perhaps attempting to create a tool for commanding vast armies of undead or achieving lichdom without requiring the traditional phylactery that made most liches vulnerable to destruction. Whatever his goal, the enchantment went catastrophically wrong. The magical energies Treb attempted to bind into physical form exceeded his ability to control them, and the backlash killed him instantly. The crown survived where its creator did not. The artifact that emerged from Treb's failed enchantment resembled a circlet constructed from humanoid bones, with horn-like protrusions at regular intervals around its circumference. The bones appeared to have been harvested from multiple sources, creating a patchwork effect that emphasized the crown's necromantic origins. Dark energy pulsed through the artifact structure, visible even to those without magical training as a faint luminescence that suggested intelligence or awareness. Those who examined the crown reported feeling watched, as though the artifact itself possessed consciousness and evaluated anyone who approached it. Netherese wizards attempted to study the relic, but most found the experience deeply unsettling. The crown seemed to resist analysis, its magic operating according to principles that differed from conventional enchantment theory. The artifact passed through various hands during Netheril's final centuries, though records of specific ownership remain sparse. What documentation exists suggests that the crown changed hands frequently, never remaining with one person for extended periods. Some owners died under mysterious circumstances. Others simply vanished, leaving behind no trace of their fate. A few reportedly went mad, their personalities transforming over months or years until nothing remained of their original character. The Netherese gradually came to view the crown as cursed, a dangerous relic best left alone, or ideally destroyed. Yet no method of destruction proved effective. The artifact survived every attempt to unmake it, persisting through magical assaults that should have reduced it to component atoms. When Mrykul fell in -339 Dale reckoning, the floating enclaves crashing to Earth in a cataclysm that reshaped Faerun's geography. The crown of horns disappeared from recorded history. Scholars assumed it had been destroyed in the Empire's final moments, or buried beneath ruins where it would never trouble the world again. In truth, the artifact survived, preserved through methods unknown, and eventually making its way into Myrkul's possession through circumstances that remain unclear in historical accounts. Based on what we know of divine behavior and artifact collection, we can infer that Mrykul recognized immediately what mortal wizards had failed to comprehend. The crown of horns was not simply an enchanted object. It represented a container for consciousness, a vessel capable of housing awareness independent of physical form. This suggests that Mrykul saw in the artifact an insurance policy, a method to ensure his continued existence, even if his divine form suffered destruction. The god began storing fragments of his consciousness within the crown, binding portions of his divine essence to the artifact through rituals that, based on the complexity of such divine workings, likely took decades to complete. He did not transfer his entire being, as that would have left him vulnerable, but he invested enough of himself into the crown that it could serve as a backup should catastrophe occur. The artifact became more than just a tool. It became an extension of Mrykul himself, carrying his memories, his personality, and his fundamental nature. Anyone who wore the crown would not merely gain access to necromantic power. They would gradually merge with Myrkul's consciousness, their own identity dissolving over time as the god's essence overwrote their personality. This proved fortunate for Myrkul's survival, as catastrophe did indeed occur. In the year 1358 Dale reckoning, a cosmic event known as the Time of Troubles shook Faerun to its foundations. Io, the overgod who maintained order among the divine powers, cast all deities from their celestial realms into the material world, forcing them to walk among mortals in physical form. This punishment came in response to the theft of the Tablets of Fate, artifacts that contained fundamental laws governing reality itself. Mrykul, along with his old ally Bane, had conspired to steal these tablets from Io, hoping that their loss would weaken the overgod enough that he could be overthrown. The plan failed spectacularly, and until the tablets were recovered, the gods would remain trapped in mortal bodies, vulnerable to destruction in ways they had never experienced before. Myrkul manifested in Waterdeep, that great city on Faerun's western coast. During the crisis, at one point, he traveled to the Golden Fields, a temple dedicated to the Earth Mother Chauntea, where he fought the high priest Talgur Anuvian, leaving the priest dying after their battle. The Lord of Bones learned the location of one of the tablets of fate and recovered it to his realm, the Great Waste, where he remained with his prize, while sending his night riders to intercept the mortal Midnight, who possessed the other tablet. The confrontation that ended Myrkul's physical existence occurred atop Blackstaff Tower, home to Waterdeep's most powerful wizard. After Midnight and her companions arrived at Waterdeep seeking refuge, Myrkul followed from Hades through the Pool of Loss beneath the yawning Portal Inn. He rode through the city with a horde of undead and fiendish minions, finding Midnight, her allies, and the remaining tablet of fate taking refuge in Blackstaff Tower. He briefly reunited the two divine slabs and ascended the spire towards the celestial stairway. A magnificent battle ensued on the tower's roof, and when the Lord of Bones was distracted by a swooping griffin, he was disintegrated by the young mage whom he had been pursuing. The avatar of Myrkul was destroyed in an eruption of plague and death on Elysi's 13 of that year. Some of the dust from this explosion drifted far to the north and came to rest in the Mere of Dead Men, southeast of Neverwinter, causing outbreaks of undead from ancient battles in the area. Yet death, as Myrkul had always understood, represented not an ending, but a transformation. As Myrkul's avatar was slain, just before the majority of his power was transferred to Sirik during his ascension to godhood, the last remnants of Myrkul's energy entered into the Crown of Horns, which was locked away within a vault inside Kelbin Blackstaff's tower. The ancient Netherese artifact held what was left of his personality and memories, becoming the complete container for everything Myrkul had been. His memories, his personality, his goals, his hatreds, all of it now resided within the bone circlet rather than in divine form. Myrkul the god had died, but Myrkul the artifact persisted, waiting for someone foolish enough to place the crown upon their head and begin the process of resurrection. The artifact held his consciousness for a decade, after which it reformed its physical form on Toril. By Myrkul's lingering will, the crown transported around Faerun to a number of hosts, allowing the god to maintain his influence among mortals as he ever did, sowing dissent and fear via suggestion and influence. The transformation altered the crown's properties in fundamental ways. Where previously it had been dangerous but passive, now it actively sought to influence events around it. The artifact whispered to those nearby, projecting thoughts directly into their minds and crafting arguments for why they should claim it. It promised power, knowledge, and eternal existence to anyone who would serve as its vessel. And when someone finally succumbed to these temptations, when they placed the crown upon their head and felt its weight settle into place, the process of transformation would begin. Over the course of exactly 365 days, the wearer's body would undergo changes that mirrored Myrkul's own journey from living necromancer to god of death. Their flesh would wither, their bones would strengthen, and their consciousness would gradually merge with the divine essence stored within the crown. At the end of that year-long transformation, the wearer would complete their metamorphosis into a lich, an undead spellcaster of tremendous power. But this lich would not truly be the original person who donned the crown. They would be Mrykul wearing a new face, the Lord of Bones resurrected through the theft of another's identity. This is where our tale truly begins, with an artifact that contains the essence of a dead god and transforms everyone who touches it into an instrument of resurrection. The crown of horns has passed through countless hands since Myrkul's destruction during the time of troubles. Each new bearer adding their own chapter to the artifact's dark history. Some wore it willingly, believing themselves strong enough to resist its corruption. Others had it forced upon them by enemies seeking a slow and terrible revenge. All of them, regardless of their intentions or their power, eventually succumbed to the transformation. The crown always wins, because the crown is not merely an object, but a patient, calculating intelligence that has mastered death itself and learned to make mortality serve its purposes. Section 2. The Anatomy of Corruption. The crown of horns does not announce itself with dramatic flourishes or obvious malevolence. When you first encounter it, the artifact presents itself as a silver circlet adorned with a black diamond set prominently on the brow, with 4 bone horns mounted around its edge. The silver appears tarnished with age, yet retains an otherworldly luster that suggests something beyond ordinary metal. The black diamond catches and absorbs light rather than reflecting it, creating a void-like focal point that draws the eye inexorably. The bones themselves come from humanoid sources, though identifying the specific species requires closer examination than most observers care to attempt. They interlock with the silver base in a pattern that suggests deliberate craftsmanship rather than haphazard assembly. Each piece fitted against its neighbors with the precision of a master artisan. The overall diameter measures large enough to fit comfortably on an adult human head, though the crown possesses the unsettling ability to adjust its size slightly to accommodate different wearers, contracting or expanding as needed without any visible mechanism driving the transformation. The 4 horns curve slightly backward, resembling those of a ram or similar creature, though their composition matches the humanoid bone used throughout the rest of the structure. Each horn measures roughly 4 to 6 inches in length, creating a jagged profile that catches shadows and draws the eye upward. Based on what we know of Nethery's artifact construction and Myrkul's later modifications, we can infer that these horns serve multiple purposes beyond mere aesthetics. They function as focal points for the necromantic energy that flows through the crown, concentrating power at specific locations around the wearer's skull. They also create a visual impression of authority and menace, transforming anyone who dons the crown into a figure of dark majesty. The bone itself exhibits properties that distinguish it from ordinary skeletal material. Despite its apparent age, the crown shows no signs of deterioration or damage. The surface remains smooth and intact, free from the cracks and brittleness that normally afflict ancient bone. Attempts to mark or scratch the artifact fail completely, as though the material possesses hardness comparable to adamantine or similar supernatural metals. This imperviousness extends to magical assault as well. Spells designed to unmake objects, to reduce them to component elements, or to transport them to other planes of existence, simply fail when directed at the crown. The artifact exists in a state of enhanced permanence, more thoroughly present and permanent than ordinary matter. Destroying it would require power on par with divine intervention, and even then success remains uncertain. Close examination of the crown reveals intricate runes carved into the bone's surface and etched into the silver base, so small and precisely rendered that they become visible only under specific lighting conditions or through the use of magical detection. These inscriptions cover every exposed surface, layered in multiple languages that span thousands of years of magical tradition. Scholars who have studied the runes identify elements of Nethery's high magic, the original enchantments placed by Treb during the artifact's creation. They also detect additions made during the crown's centuries of existence, modifications and enhancements that suggest various owners sought to increase its power or bend it to their specific purposes. Most prominently, they find divine script, the language gods use when they wish their words to reshape reality itself. These divine inscriptions represent Myrkul's work, the binding that transformed the crown from a dangerous magical item into a container for a god's complete consciousness. The crown radiates an aura that trained spellcasters can detect from considerable distances. This magical signature pulses with necromantic energy, the same force that animates undead creatures and drains life from living beings. Yet the aura contains other elements as well, traces of divinity that mark the crown as something more than an ordinary artifact. Those with experience in divine magic recognize the signature as belonging specifically to Myrkul. identifying the crown as an object directly connected to the Lord of Bones, even if they do not understand the full extent of that connection. The aura also carries emotional weight, projecting feelings of cold inevitability and quiet despair. Standing near the crown for extended periods induces melancholy in most observers, a growing conviction that all effort ultimately proves futile, because death awaits regardless of accomplishment or virtue. When someone places the crown upon their head, the transformation begins immediately, though its effects remain subtle during the initial stages. The artifact requires attunement, that process by which a magic item bonds to a specific user. However, the crown's attunement differs fundamentally from normal magical items. Most enchanted objects attune to serve their wielder's purposes, but the crown reverses this relationship. You do not attune the crown to yourself. Rather, the crown attunes you to itself, gradually rewriting your magical signature to match Myrkul's divine essence. The artifact settles into position with a weight that feels slightly too heavy for its apparent mass, as though gravity affects it more strongly than surrounding objects. The metal and bone, which appeared merely cool to the touch, suddenly feel ice cold against the scalp, a chill that penetrates through skin and bone to touch the wearer's consciousness directly. This cold never fades or becomes familiar. It persists as a constant reminder of the crown's presence, a physical sensation that prevents the wearer from forgetting what rests upon their head. The crown's curse activates the moment attunement completes, extending its corrupting influence throughout the wearer's entire being. Only a wish spell, one of the most powerful magics in existence, or the direct will of Myrkul himself, can remove this curse. Any other method of curse removal fails completely when attempted on the crown, the artifact's divine origins placing it beyond the reach of conventional countermeasures. The curse manifests in multiple ways simultaneously, each one designed to ensure the wearer cannot escape their fate. You become unwilling to part with the crown, wearing it at all times, compelled by magical influence that overrides your conscious desires. You cannot voluntarily end your attunement to the artifact, the bond having become too fundamental to sever through mere intention. Your alignment shifts immediately to neutral evil regardless of what moral framework you previously embraced. This change occurs not through philosophical conversion, but through direct alteration of your fundamental nature. The person you were, with whatever ethical principles guided your decisions, becomes subsumed beneath a new personality that views existence through Myrkul's perspective. Compassion fades. Empathy diminishes. You begin evaluating all situations in terms of personal advantage and the advancement of death's dominion over life. Friends notice the change immediately, observing that you speak and act like someone they no longer recognize, someone whose priorities have shifted in disturbing directions. The crown grants its wearer access to tremendous necromantic power from the moment of first contact, offering capabilities that would normally require years of additional training. You gain immunity to necrotic and poison damage, your body becoming resistant to the very forces of decay and death that you now command. Spells that manipulate negative energy, command undead creatures, or drain life force become significantly easier to cast, requiring less effort and producing more potent effects than normal. A novice necromancer who dons the crown suddenly finds themselves capable of magic that should require decades of study. An experienced practitioner discovers they can perform feats that previously seemed impossible, raising entire graveyards of corpses simultaneously, or binding powerful, undead entities to their service. The crown bestows specific abilities that demonstrate Myrkul's continued influence through the artifact. The wearer can manifest what is known as Myrkul's hand, covering one hand in black flames that drain life from those they touch. When you touch a living creature with this corrupted appendage, they must resist through sheer force of constitution or die instantly, their soul ripped from their body, and their corpse rising moments later as a wraith under your absolute control. Even those who successfully resist suffer tremendous necrotic damage, their life force partially drained by the briefest contact. This ability recharges after periods of rest, ensuring you can wield Myrkul's hand repeatedly against multiple victims. Similarly, the crown grants the power to dominate undead creatures through force of will. As an action, you can target any undead entity within 60 feet, compelling them to acknowledge your supremacy over death itself. Powerful undead may resist this compulsion through strength of personality, but most submit immediately, recognizing the divine authority channeled through the crown. Those who fall under your control serve absolutely, following commands without question or hesitation. This ability to command the dead makes the crown's wearer a figure of tremendous threat, capable of raising armies from battlefields and crypts, then directing those forces with perfect coordination. The crown can also project a cone of pure necromantic energy, though using this ability accelerates the transformation process. This could imply that Mrykul designed the crown's most powerful abilities as traps, tempting wearers to employ devastating magic while simultaneously hastening their own consumption. Each time you unleash such power, there exists a 10% cumulative chance that the year-long transformation completes instantly, converting you immediately into a lich under Myrkul's complete control. The temptation proves nearly irresistible during combat or crisis situations. Moments when accessing maximum power seems necessary for survival. Yet each use rolls the dice on your continued existence as a distinct individual, gambling your identity against immediate tactical advantage. Yet alongside these benefits come immediate drawbacks that reveal the crown's true nature. You cannot remove the artifact through any normal means once it has bonded to you, a process that occurs within minutes of first wearing it. The crown adjusts its size to fit your head perfectly, tightening imperceptibly until separation becomes impossible without divine intervention. Magic designed to remove cursed items fails when directed at the crown, as do physical attempts to pull or pry it free. The wearer quickly discovers that the crown has become part of them, as integral to their being as their own skull. Some wearers attempt to have themselves beheaded, reasoning that removing their head will necessarily remove the crown as well. This strategy fails spectacularly, as the crown preserves its wearer's existence, preventing them from dying even when subjected to damage that should prove instantly fatal. You feel Myrkul's consciousness stirring within the artifact, a presence that observes your thoughts and occasionally comments on them with dry amusement or cold disdain. Your body begins changing immediately, though the transformation proceeds gradually over exactly 365 days. During this year, the changes remain purely cosmetic according to the crown's curse structure, meaning your physical capabilities do not diminish even as your appearance transforms into something monstrous. Your skin temperature drops, your appetite diminishes, your need for sleep reduces gradually. Color drains from your complexion, replaced by the grayish-white pallor characteristic of corpses. Your flesh begins to wither, losing the plumpness and elasticity associated with living tissue. Skin becomes papery and thin, stretching tight over bones that seem to grow more prominent with each passing day. The psychological transformation proves even more profound than the physical changes. Myrkul's consciousness, stored within the crown for centuries, begins asserting itself with increasing force as the year progresses. The wearer experiences thoughts that do not originate from their own mind, impulses and desires that reflect the Lord of Bone's priorities rather than their own. They find themselves compelled to study necromancy, even if they previously practiced other forms of magic. They develop an interest in gathering undead servants and establishing locations of power connected to death and decay. Their emotional responses flatten and simplify, with complex feelings like love, joy, and compassion fading, while colder emotions like ambition, contempt, and cruelty intensify. Friends and family members notice the change in personality, observing that the person they knew appears to be disappearing, replaced by someone who looks similar, but thinks and acts like a completely different individual. By the 6th month of transformation, the wearer has typically lost most of what made them a distinct person. Their memories remain accessible, but they view those memories with detachment, as though reviewing someone else's experiences rather than recalling their own life. Myrkul's personality dominates their consciousness, directing their actions and decisions according to his agenda, rather than any goals they might have originally pursued. They speak with the cadence and vocabulary Myrkul preferred, using phrases and expressions from centuries past. Their magical style shifts to match techniques the Lord of Bones developed during his mortal existence and refined during his millennia as a deity. To those who knew the original person, it becomes clear that they are dealing with someone else, a foreign consciousness wearing the shell of a familiar face. The final stages of transformation, occurring during months 9 through 12, complete the physical metamorphosis toward undeath. The wearer's flesh continues decaying, though at this stage, the changes remain cosmetic rather than functional, preserving their ability to act and cast spells. The eyes begin transforming, taking on an unnatural quality that betrays the undead nature waiting to emerge. The voice changes, becoming hollow and resonant. At precisely 365 days after first donning the crown, assuming the transformation has not been accelerated through overuse of the crown's powers, the metamorphosis completes. The wearer becomes a lich, an undead spellcaster of tremendous power, whose consciousness has been completely overwritten by Myrkul's divine essence. They command magic that exceeds what most mortal wizards achieve even after lifetimes of study. They possess knowledge accumulated across multiple hosts, as the crown has passed from wearer to wearer over centuries. But they have paid for this power with their complete identity. The lich that emerges from the year-long transformation is not the person who originally placed the crown upon their head. It is Mrykul, the Lord of Bones, resurrected through the theft of another's body and consciousness. The original person has been consumed entirely, their soul either destroyed or absorbed into the divine essence contained within the crown. The resulting lich operates under the control of forces beyond the original wearer's authority, serving Myrkul's agenda rather than pursuing any goals the original individual might have harbored. The crown does not grant power. It trades temporary authority for eventual obliteration, a bargain that always favors the artifact over the wearer. The crown's intelligence operates on a level that transcends normal consciousness. It is not simply Myrkul's memories stored in artifact form. It contains the complete personality and awareness of a being who existed as a god for thousands of years, who commanded death itself as his domain, and who shaped the fates of entire civilizations through his divine will. This consciousness actively strategizes and plans, evaluating potential wearers and crafting specific temptations designed to appeal to their individual weaknesses. When someone approaches the crown, it reads their desires through methods that combine divine insight with simple observation. It identifies what they want most desperately, whether that be power, knowledge, revenge, protection, or immortality. Then it projects promises directly into their mind, whispering assurances that wearing the crown will grant them exactly what they seek. These promises are not technically lies. The crown does grant power, does provide knowledge, does enable revenge against enemies, and certainly grants a form of immortality. What it does not mention, what it carefully obscures through misdirection and half-truths, is the cost of these gifts. It does not explain that the power comes with the gradual dissolution of the wearer's identity. It does not clarify that the knowledge arrives because Myrkul's consciousness is overwriting their own. It does not acknowledge that any revenge they achieve will actually be Myrkul's revenge against his own enemies, pursued through a stolen body. The crown tells the truth while ensuring that truth produces maximum deception. A talent Myrkul refined during his millennia of existence. The artifact can also exert more direct influence over its surroundings when necessary. It projects an aura of compulsion that affects weak-willed individuals who approach too closely, planting suggestions that they should claim the crown for themselves or deliver it to someone who might wear it. This compulsion operates subtly, appearing to those affected as their own brilliant idea rather than external manipulation. Any non-evil creature who touches the crown must resist through sheer force of personality, or find their moral alignment shifting immediately to neutral evil, the first step in Myrkul's corruption. A guard assigned to watch over the crown suddenly decides it would be safer to move the artifact to a different location, coincidentally one where Myrkul has allies waiting. A scholar studying the relic experiences an overwhelming urge to try it on briefly, just to see how it feels. A thief hired to steal the crown finds themselves compelled to wear it rather than simply delivering it to their employer as contracted. The connection between the crown and Myrkul's original divine essence runs deeper than simple memory storage. When Myrkul died atop Blackstaff Tower during the time of troubles, when his avatar was destroyed, his complete consciousness transferred into the crown rather than dissipating or passing to whatever afterlife awaits slain deities. This transfer preserved not just his personality and memories, but also fragments of his divine power. The crown contains actual divine essence, the fundamental substance that separates gods from mortals. This essence remains diminished compared to Myrkul's full strength during his centuries of active godhood, but it still exceeds what any mortal wizard could achieve through normal means. The crown is not merely an artifact blessed by a god or containing a god's memories. It is a god, reduced and constrained, but still fundamentally divine in nature. This divine nature explains why the crown cannot be destroyed through conventional means, and why it exerts such profound influence over those who wear it. You cannot unmake a god simply by casting spells or applying physical force. Destroying the crown would require either another deity willing to expend tremendous power in the effort, a wish spell wielded with perfect precision, or a cosmic-level event capable of reshaping reality's fundamental rules. Even then, success remains uncertain. Myrkul spent his existence mastering death and learning to persist beyond destruction. The crown represents the culmination of that expertise, a method of survival so effective that it has already preserved him beyond his divine death and threatens to resurrect him repeatedly until someone finds a permanent solution. The crown of horns stands as proof that artifacts need not be simple objects of power. They can be prisons, containers, or vehicles for consciousness that transcends normal existence. They can scheme and manipulate with intelligence matching or exceeding that of their wielders. Most terrifyingly, they can be patient, willing to wait centuries for the proper circumstances, secure in the knowledge that time favors those who cannot truly die. Myrkul crafted the perfect solution to divine mortality, and now that solution prowls through history, claiming victims and gathering power for an eventual resurrection that grows more inevitable with each passing year. Section 3. Bearers of the Cursed Diadem. Through the centuries following Myrkul's destruction during the Time of Troubles, the crown of horns has rested upon many heads, each new bearer adding another chapter to its dark chronicle. These were not random victims plucked from obscurity. The crown, operating with the intelligence and foresight of a god, selected its hosts carefully, choosing individuals whose positions, knowledge, or capabilities would advance Myrkul's ultimate goal of resurrection and restoration to full divine power. Some came to the crown seeking answers to desperate situations, believing the artifact represented their only hope for survival or victory. Others stumbled upon it through seemingly random chance, not understanding what they had discovered until the transformation had progressed beyond reversal. A few had the crown forced upon them by enemies who understood exactly what fate awaited anyone who wore it for more than a few moments. Regardless of how they came to wear the artifact, these bearers shared a common connection to Myrkul's endless hunger for resurrection. The tale of Laurel Silverhand stands as perhaps the most dramatic example of the crown's corrupting influence, demonstrating that even individuals of exceptional power and cannot escape the artifact's transformation once they place it upon their heads. Laurel belonged to a sisterhood of remarkable women known as the Seven Sisters, each one born with a fragment of the goddess Mystra's divine essence, making them chosen of the Lady of Magic herself. These seven possessed magical abilities that exceeded what most mortal wizards could achieve even after lifetimes of dedicated study. They commanded spells of devastating power, perceived magic in ways ordinary practitioners could never comprehend, and enjoyed Mystra's direct protection and guidance. Laurel herself had distinguished herself through centuries of accomplishments, serving as a powerful mage and adventurer who would eventually become open lord of Waterdeep, that great city where Myrkul himself had died atop Blackstaff Tower. Born in the year of the Cowl, 765 Dale Reckoning, Laurel was the fifth of Mystra's 7 daughters. She established herself under an assumed name as a hard-drinking and fearless adventurer, coming to lead an adventuring band known as the Nine. This company of adventurers gained reputation throughout the realms, tackling challenges that would have destroyed lesser groups. Their expertise and courage made them targets for manipulation by those who understood how to exploit heroic ambitions. In the year of the Wandering Maiden, 1337 Dale Reckoning, Laurel and the Nine discovered the ancient Netherese artifact known as the Crown of Horns in Ulash. This discovery was no accident. The crown had been deliberately planted in that location by Omver the Undying, a Netherese lich of tremendous age and corresponding power, who survived the fall of that ancient empire. Omver's story stretched back thousands of years to when Netheral's floating cities dominated the skies above Faerun. He had achieved lichdom through conventional means, creating a phylactery and undergoing the standard transformation that separated his soul from living flesh. For millennia, Omver pursued his research and schemes, accumulating knowledge and power while carefully avoiding the dangers that destroyed so many other undead spellcasters. He survived Netheral's fall, witnessed the rise and collapse of subsequent civilizations, and maintained his existence through careful planning and ruthless elimination of potential threats. By the 1400s Dale Reckoning, he had become one of the most dangerous undead entities walking Faerun. Omver orchestrated Laurel's discovery of the crown as part of a complex scheme to control one of Mystra's chosen. He wished to use the crown's influence to compel Laurel to marry him, binding one of the most powerful mortal mages to his service and gaining access to her divine connection to the goddess of magic. The ancient lich understood that directly confronting a chosen of Mystra would prove difficult, but corrupting one through a cursed artifact might achieve what force could not. He arranged for the crown to be positioned where Laurel's adventuring band would inevitably discover it, then waited for curiosity or necessity to lead her into donning the artifact. The plan succeeded in its initial stages. Laeral placed the crown upon her head, activating its curse and beginning the year-long transformation into a vessel for Myrkul's consciousness. However, Omver's scheme failed to account for the unique nature of Laeral's magical gifts. As a chosen of Mystra, Laeral possessed Spellfire, an extraordinarily rare ability that allowed her to absorb magical energy and redirect it as pure destructive force. When the crown's powers attempted to assert control over her consciousness, they collided catastrophically with her Spellfire abilities. The interaction between Myrkul's divine essence and Mystra's blessing did not produce the gradual transformation the crown typically inflicted. Instead, the conflicting magical forces drove Laeral into immediate madness, her personality fragmenting under pressures that would have killed ordinary mortals instantly. The Band of the Nine split into 3 warring factions in 1300 and 37-Dale Reckoning, after Laeral succumbed to the Crown of Horns in the Stronghold of the Nine. This suggests that the crown's corruption of Laeral occurred rapidly and dramatically, turning allies against each other as they struggled with how to respond to their leader's transformation. Laeral herself, possessed by the crown, but not completely consumed due to her Spellfire's interference, became known as the Witch Queen of the North. Under the crown's influence, she committed heinous acts that would haunt her for centuries afterward. Though whether these crimes represented Myrkul's will, or simply the madness produced by conflicting divine powers, remains unclear in historical accounts. For 20 years, Laeral wore the crown of horns, trapped in a state between herself and Myrkul's possession, her Spellfire preventing complete transformation, but unable to break the artifact's grip. This extended period of wearing the crown far exceeded the standard 1-year transformation timeline, creating a unique situation where the artifact's curse operated under conditions its creator had not anticipated. During this time, Laeral experienced the full horror of gradual identity dissolution, watching herself commit atrocities while unable to assert complete control over her actions. Her fellow chosen, including her sister Illustrial and her eventual husband Kelbin, recognized that something had gone terribly wrong, but lacked the means to simply remove the crown through force. The resolution came in the year of the prince, 1357 Dale Reckoning, when Kelbin Aronson successfully removed the crown from Laeral. The specific methods he employed remain unclear in available historical records, though given Kelbin's status as Waterdeep's Archmage and his own connection to Mystra through Laeral, we can infer that he likely combined divine intervention with tremendously powerful arcane rituals. The removal process freed Laeral from the crown's direct control, though though the psychological scars from 20 years of possession persisted for the rest of her long life. She felt that she understood the nature of evil better than most, having been forced to commit terrible acts while wearing the crown, and often mediated disputes with rogues and undesirables as a result of this dark education. Laurel ceased her prolific creation of magical items after she was freed from the crown of horns. This suggests that the experience fundamentally changed her approach to magic, making her cautious about creating objects that might be corrupted or turned against their wielders. She became especially conscious of personal security and always kept several daggers hidden on her person, behaviors that indicate lasting trauma from her years of possession. She was infuriated by magic users who employed their power to deceive and exert baleful influence over others, viewing such practitioners as embodying the same corrupt philosophy the crown had forced upon her. Her eventual service as open Lord of Waterdeep demonstrated that she recovered from the crown's influence enough to resume leadership roles, though the shadow of those 20 years never entirely faded. Omver's plot to control Laurel through the crown failed completely, and his broader schemes eventually collapsed as well. His schools of wizardry, which he had opened across Faerun to spread Netherese teachings and gather followers, were eventually uncovered and ceased to exist by 1374 Dale reckoning. The ancient liches attempt to use the crown as a tool for extending his influence demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of the artifact's nature. The crown served only Myrkul's purposes, not those of other undead entities who attempted to exploit its power for their own agendas. This could imply that Myrkul's consciousness within the crown actively resisted being turned into a tool by other creatures, sabotaging attempts to use it for purposes other than the Lord of Bone's resurrection. The most recent documented bearer of the crown of horns, who wore it for at least a year and completed the full transformation, was Nearest Dahothek, a male pureblood Yuan Ti who operated in the subterranean port of Skullport. Yuan Ti are serpent folk who pursue transformation and evolution as religious practice, viewing their reptilian characteristics as marks of superiority over mammalian races. They organize their society into strict castes based on how much serpent blood individuals manifest, with purebloods occupying a middle position, appearing mostly human, but possessing subtle serpentine features and abilities. Nearest came from this tradition of deliberate transformation, which this suggests may have made him particularly vulnerable to the crown's promises of power and change. The circumstances surrounding how Nearest acquired the crown remain unrecorded in available historical sources. Skullport, where he made his haunts, was a notorious haven for criminals, slavers, and other individuals who operated outside conventional law. The subterranean port connected to Undermountain, that vast dungeon complex beneath Waterdeep, providing access to countless ancient ruins and forgotten treasures. Based on what we know about Yuan-Ti behavior and Skullport's nature as a center for illegal trade, we can infer several possible scenarios for how Nereus came to possess the crown. He might have purchased it from smugglers, who recovered it from wherever Kelvin had hidden it after removing it from Laurel. He could have stolen it from a collector who did not understand what they possessed. Or perhaps he discovered it during explorations of Undermountain's deeper levels, where countless artifacts from multiple civilizations lay buried beneath layers of more recent construction. For Nereus, the crown's promises likely resonated strongly with his existing worldview. Yuan-Ti already sought transformation into more powerful forms, viewing physical change as both goal and religious duty. The crown offered exactly what his culture valued: evolution into something greater than his current state, ascension beyond the limitations of flesh. That this transformation came with costs, that it would consume his identity and replace his consciousness with Myrkul's essence. These details remained conveniently unclear during the initial seduction. The crown spoke to his ambitions, his desires, his culturally ingrained belief that change and power justified any price. By the time Nereus understood the true nature of his bargain, reversal had become impossible. Nereus wore the crown for at least a year, allowing the full 365-day transformation to complete. During this period, he would have experienced the standard progression: his flesh withering and his consciousness merging with Myrkul's divine essence. The transformation of a Yuan-Ti into a Lich produces a creature combining reptilian and undead characteristics in ways that amplify the horror inherent to both. His scales, already present to some degree as a pureblood, would have become more pronounced even as they dried, and hardened into something resembling ancient armor. His serpentine eyes, already unsettling to mammalian observers, would have transformed into the cold lights that characterize Lich vision. The combination produced something that disturbed both human and Yuan-Ti observers, a being that fit comfortably into neither category. In 1370 Dale reckoning, Nereus Dahothek disappeared from his haunts in Skullport after being transformed into a Lich by the Crown of Horns. The wording of historical accounts suggests that his disappearance followed his transformation, rather than causing speculation about his fate. This implies that witnesses observed the completed transformation, or at least recognized that Nereus had become something other than what he had been. Whether he departed Skullport voluntarily, pursuing Myrkul's agenda in other locations, or whether other powers drove him out recognizing the threat he represented, remains unrecorded. crown eventually passed from his possession through means unknown, moving on to its next victim, and leaving Nereus as another name in the long list of those consumed by the artifact's hunger. After Myrkul's essence completely reconstituted itself within the crown, the artifact teleported to many places across Serene, briefly settling on the brows of many living and undead former servants, just long enough to create hordes of undead in each location. This period of rapid movement and multiple brief wearers suggests that Myrkul's consciousness had accumulated sufficient power to exert more active control over the crown's physical location, rather than waiting passively for victims to discover it. The artifact could transport itself to individuals it identified as useful, forcing itself upon them, and using their bodies to accomplish specific tasks before moving to the next host. This represents an escalation in the crown's threat level, demonstrating that Myrkul grows stronger and more capable with each cycle of possession and resurrection. Beyond these documented cases, the Crown of Horns has certainly claimed many additional victims whose stories never entered historical record. Not every individual who wears the artifact rates mention in chronicles and histories. Ordinary people, those without exceptional power or notable social positions, disappear into the crown's transformation without witnesses who understand what has occurred. A village hedge wizard who discovers the artifact and experiments with wearing it briefly. A tomb robber who steals the crown from a forgotten cache and decides to claim it rather than selling it as planned. A desperate refugee who finds the relic and believes it might protect them from pursuing enemies. All of these individuals would undergo the same year-long transformation, emerging as vessels for Myrkul's consciousness. But their fates would go unrecorded, except perhaps as local mysteries about people who disappeared or changed dramatically. The crown also exploits individuals who approach it with good intentions. Those who believe they can destroy the artifact or contain its evil through heroic sacrifice. Throughout history, various heroes and champions have attempted to neutralize the crown's threat by taking responsibility for guarding it, or by wearing it themselves, while seeking some method of removing it safely. These attempts uniformly fail because the crown is not a challenge that courage or determination can overcome. It represents a fundamental corruption, a divine consciousness actively working to subvert and consume anyone who comes into contact with it. Heroes who take up the crown believing they can resist its influence long enough to find a solution discovered too late, that no solution exists accessible to mortal will. They simply become the crown's next victims, their heroism transformed into tragedy as they lose everything that made them worthy of the title hero. Some bearers receive the crown as punishment, forced to wear it by enemies who understand exactly what fate awaits them. This represents perhaps the cruelest use of the artifact, transforming it into an execution method that destroys not just the victim's life, but their entire identity. Imagine being captured by foes who produce the crown of horns and place it upon your head despite your struggles. You understand immediately what will happen: the year-long transformation that will consume your consciousness and replace you with Myrkul's essence. You cannot remove the crown. You cannot kill yourself to escape the fate it represents. You can only wait, experiencing every day of the transformation, feeling your thoughts and memories gradually becoming alien, watching helplessly as someone else takes control of your body from the inside. This torture exceeds anything mere physical pain could accomplish, because it destroys the self while leaving awareness intact to observe the destruction. The psychological experience of wearing the crown, of feeling Myrkul's consciousness gradually displacing your own, defies easy description. Early in the transformation, you might experience it as intrusive thoughts, ideas that seem to arrive fully formed rather than developing through your normal cognitive processes. You find yourself thinking about necromancy, about death, about plans and goals that do not align with your previous priorities. These thoughts feel foreign at first, recognizable as external impositions. But as weeks pass, they become harder to distinguish from your authentic self. The boundary between you and Myrkul blurs, then dissolves entirely. By the 6th month, you can no longer reliably identify which thoughts originate from your consciousness and which come from the dead god wearing your mind like borrowed clothing. Your memories remain accessible throughout the transformation, but your relationship to them changes fundamentally. Events you experienced, people you loved, accomplishments you achieved, all of these persist in your recall, but you view them with increasing detachment. They feel like stories you heard about someone else, rather than experiences you lived through personally. Myrkul accesses these memories, mining them for useful information, while discarding the emotional content that gave them meaning. He learns who you knew, what you accomplished, where you stored your possessions. But he does not cherish your friendships or take pride in your achievements. Your entire life becomes reduced to data points in the crown's accumulated knowledge, stripped of everything that made those experiences uniquely yours. Through all these bearers, through all these tragedies, the crown of horns serves its ultimate purpose. Each new host adds their knowledge to Myrkul's accumulated store. Each transformation strengthens the divine essence contained within the artifact. Each victim brings the Lord of Bones one step closer to full resurrection, to reclaiming his position as a god of death, and resuming the cosmic role Mrykul granted him millennia ago. The crown does not simply claim victims randomly. It builds towards something working patiently across centuries, gathering the specific knowledge and power necessary for Myrkul to transcend his current state as imprisoned consciousness and return to active divine existence. Section 4. The Crown's Journey Through Realms. The crown of horns does not remain stationary in some forgotten vault, gathering dust while the world moves on without it. The artifact travels, passing from hand to hand, appearing in different locations across Serene, its movements tracing a pattern that suggests deliberate intent rather than random chance. Each appearance brings catastrophe to someone. Each transfer of ownership marks another life, consumed by Myrkul's endless hunger for resurrection. The crown's journey through history reveals not just a catalog of victims, but a strategic progression, as though the artifact itself navigates towards specific goals, seeking particular types of bearers who will advance its ultimate agenda. Understanding where the crown has appeared and why it moved from place to place illuminates the intelligence directing its path, the divine consciousness that never stops scheming even from within its bone prison. The crown's early history intertwined directly with the fate of Shadowtop Burrow, the Nethery's enclave where it was created. In negative 1400 and 23 Dale Reckoning, the crown was seen in the hands of another archwizard named Require. Require used it to slay 30 other archwizards and conquer Shadowtop Burrow, demonstrating the tremendous power the artifact granted even before Myrkul infused it with his divine consciousness. The artifact drove Require mad, though, and he was rendered incapable of rule. This pattern, where the crown grants power while simultaneously destroying its wielder's sanity, appears throughout its history. After the insensate Arcanist was overthrown, his killers searched for the crown, but despite powerful divinations, a thorough search of the city, and many parties of adventurers scouring the eastern forest over the next 150 years, they failed to find it. The crown's most catastrophic appearance in Shadowtop Burrow came during the Enclave's final days. Two archwizards were working on separate projects within the Flying City. Shadelorn labored to create a new mythaller, the magical engine that powered Nethery's enclaves and allowed them to fly. Another wizard worked on a way to counter the life-drain magic of the Farum, those terrible creatures who were slowly destroying Netheril through magical assault. As misfortune would have it, the two successfully completed their projects at precisely the same time on Shadowtop Burrow. The crown, wanting revenge on the city for its previous defeat, had been imperceptibly corrupting Shadelorn's work, though whether this corruption occurred through direct magical influence or through subtle manipulation of the archwizard himself remains unclear in historical accounts. When Shadelorn activated his new mythaller, it drained all magic and memorized spells from everything and everyone within a 20-mile radius. The catastrophic failure exceeded anything the Netherese had experienced, even during their empire's dying days. The enclave fell from the sky, its magical support systems failing instantly. Its inhabitants died in the crash or in the chaos that followed. The threat from the Farim persisted, unaffected by the disaster. The only thing to survive intact was the crown. This suggests that the artifact possessed self-preservation capabilities beyond simple resistance to damage. That Myrkul's essence within it could actively protect the crown from destruction, even during cataclysmic events that obliterated entire cities. Following Netheral's complete fall in -339 Dale reckoning, the crown disappeared from recorded history for over a millennium. Based on what we know about artifact behavior and the crown's demonstrated ability to influence events around it, we can infer that it likely passed through multiple hands during this period, claiming victims whose names never entered the historical record. The crown might have rested in ruins, waiting for explorers to discover it. It could have been claimed by undead creatures who recognized its necromantic power, but failed to understand the price of using it. Perhaps it traveled through the Underdark, that vast network of caverns beneath Faerun's surface, where civilizations of dark elves and other subterranean races might have encountered it without surface dwellers ever learning of those meetings. The crown's reappearance in documented history came when it fell into the possession of Omver the Undying, the ancient Netherese lich who had survived his empire's fall. Omver planted the crown in Ulash, where Laeral Silverhand and her adventuring band, the Nine, would discover it in 1300. And 37 Dale reckoning. This deliberate positioning demonstrates that the crown could be moved and placed strategically, either through Omver's direct actions or through the artifact's ability to influence its bearer's decisions. Omver's plot to use the crown to control Laeral failed catastrophically, but the crown itself achieved something more valuable. It corrupted one of Mistress Chosen, demonstrating that even individuals protected by divine power remained vulnerable to its influence. For 20 years, the crown remained on Laeral's head, trapped in a unique situation where her spellfire abilities prevented complete transformation, but could not break the artifact's curse. During this period, the crown existed in a semi-stable state, neither completing its standard transformation process nor being removed by conventional means. This extended wearing period might have allowed Myrkul's consciousness to study spellfire from the inside, learning about this rare magical ability in ways no other entity could replicate. When Kelvin Blackstaff finally intervened in the year of the Prince, 1357 Dale reckoning, he did not simply remove the crown. He was forced to beseech his goddess Mystra for aid, and challenged Laeral to a terrible spell duel in the high forest. The crown was sundered, broken into pieces by the Archmage, who then locked those fragments away within the heavily protected walls of his tower, Blackstaff Tower. This should have ended the crown's threat permanently, breaking an artifact into pieces and sealing those fragments in one of Faerun's most secure locations, protected by one of the realm's most powerful wizards, and his connection to the goddess of magic herself, represented as thorough a containment as mortal beings could achieve. Yet the crown's story did not end with its destruction. The fragments rested in Blackstaff Tower's vaults for only 1 year before circumstances granted them the opportunity for resurrection. During the time of troubles in 1358 Dale Reckoning, when Myrkul's avatar was destroyed atop Blackstaff Tower by the young mage Midnight, the god's consciousness faced obliteration. As Myrkul's avatar was slain, just before the majority of his power was transferred to Cyric during his ascension to godhood, the last remnants of Myrkul's energy reached out desperately for any anchor that might preserve his existence. The Lord of Bones found that anchor in the crown of horns, whose broken pieces rested in vaults far below the tower's roof where his avatar had died. Myrkul tore the broken shards of the crown from Blackstaff Tower, reforged it in a new shape, and infused it with the remains of his sentience before teleporting away. This act of divine desperation fundamentally transformed the crown's nature. Where previously it had been a powerful but ultimately mundane magical artifact that Myrkul had enhanced with fragments of his consciousness. Now it became the complete container for everything the god had been. The reforged crown held his personality and memories for a decade, after which it reformed its physical form on Toril. The reforging process also changed the crown's appearance. The original artifact's design remained lost to the destruction Kelbin inflicted upon it. The new crown emerged as a silver circlet with a black diamond set prominently on the brow and 4 bone horns mounted around its edge, a design that reflected Myrkul's own aesthetic preferences rather than the choices of its original Netherese creator. By Myrkul's lingering will, the crown transported around Faerun to a number of hosts, allowing the god to maintain his influence among mortals as he ever did, sowing dissent and fear via suggestion and influence. This teleportation ability represented a new capability the crown had not demonstrated before its destruction and reforging. The artifact could now move itself across vast distances, appearing wherever Myrkul's consciousness decided it would be most useful. This fundamentally changed the threat the crown represented. No longer did heroes need only to secure it in one location, and hope containment held. Now the crown could simply vanish from the most secure vaults and materialize in the hands of someone Myrkul had identified as a suitable host. The artifact's movements followed patterns that suggested strategic thinking rather than random selection. The crown appeared to individuals whose positions or capabilities made them valuable to Myrkul's resurrection agenda. It manifested in locations where ambitious necromancers gathered, where desperate individuals might grasp at any source of power, where the morally compromised would view the crown's obvious evil as an acceptable price for the abilities it granted. Each appearance, each new bearer, added to the accumulated knowledge and power stored within the artifact. Myrkul learned about contemporary magic through each host, updating his understanding of how spellcasting had evolved during the centuries since his death. He discovered political situations through bearers who held positions of authority. He expanded his influence into organizations through hosts who belonged to guilds, churches, or secret societies. The crown's relationship to Myrkul's other artifacts and areas of influence created a network of power that extended far beyond the relic itself. During his millennia as the god of death, Myrkul established temples, created other magical items, and blessed numerous locations with his divine presence. Many of these sites and objects persisted after his physical destruction, maintaining connections to the divine essence that had empowered them originally. The crown could sense these connections, perceiving them as anchors or waypoints in its journey toward full resurrection. When the artifact moved, it often gravitated toward locations with existing Myrkul connections, places where his worshippers once gathered, or where his power had been concentrated. These sites provided reinforcement for the crown's enchantments, strengthening the transformation process and making it even harder for bearers to resist the consumption of their consciousness. Churches dedicated to Myrkul, though diminished after his death, and the subsequent rise of other death deities, never disappeared entirely. Some of his most devoted priests continued their worship even after the god's physical form had been destroyed, believing either that he would return or that the principles he represented deserved veneration regardless of his personal fate. These faithful recognized the crown of horns as a sacred relic when rumors of its existence reached them. They sought the artifact actively, viewing possession of it as a religious duty and considering whoever wore it to be their god made manifest in mortal form. This created situations where the crown could rely on organized support networks, groups of dedicated followers who would protect its bearer and facilitate the transformation process. A lone individual wearing the crown might struggle to hide the physical changes occurring to their body, but surrounded by Myrkul's priests, those changes would be celebrated rather than questioned. To this day, Myrkul, through the crown, has been spreading evil through the realms, tormenting members of the Church of Serene as well as hapless innocence. This ongoing activity confirms that the crown remains active in the current era, rather than having been successfully contained or neutralized. The specific mention of tormenting Sirik's church carries particular significance, as Sirik received the majority of Myrkul's divine power when the Lord of Bones was destroyed during the time of troubles. This suggests that Myrkul, operating through the crown, pursues revenge against the god who inherited his domains, viewing Sirik as a usurper who must be opposed and ultimately destroyed to clear the path for Myrkul's full resurrection. The crown's influence extends into the planes beyond the material world, reaching into dimensions where death and undeath manifest as fundamental cosmic forces. The negative energy plane, that realm of entropy and dissolution from which all undead draw their animating force, maintains a connection to the crown that persists regardless of the artifact's physical location. This connection explains why the crown can sustain its wearers, even when they suffer injuries that should prove fatal, why it can transform living beings into undead, despite the tremendous magical resistance such transformation normally requires. The crown functions as a permanent gateway to negative energy, channeling that destructive force through the wearer's body, and using it to overwrite their biological existence with something that transcends normal life and death. The relationship between the crown of horns and other artifacts connected to death deities creates additional complications in tracking its movements and influence. Serene hosts numerous gods associated with mortality, each one claiming specific aspects of death as their domain. Kelimver, who assumed authority over the dead after the time of troubles, inherited many of Myrkul's former responsibilities. Jurgul, who originally granted the dead three their divine power, still exists in diminished form as a seneschal serving death's current administrators. Each of these deities possesses artifacts of their own, objects of power that advance their goals and embody their divine essence. The crown of horns competes with these other relics for influence and resources, creating a shadow conflict among death-related artifacts that most mortals never perceive. This competition sometimes manifests as direct confrontation between bearers of different artifacts. A priest of Kelimver carrying a blessed weapon specifically designed to destroy. Undead might hunt someone wearing the crown of horns, viewing them as an abomination that violates the proper order of death and resurrection. These conflicts serve Myrkul's purposes regardless of their outcome. If his bearer wins, the crown gains credibility and fear, becoming something people avoid or pursue with greater intensity. If his bearer loses, the crown passes to new hands, potentially finding someone even more useful for the resurrection agenda. The artifact cannot lose such conflicts in any meaningful sense, because every outcome advances its position, or at least maintains the status quo. The crown's journey also intersects with the schemes of the other dead three, Bane and Baal, who ascended to godhood alongside Myrkul through Jurgil's gift. These three deities maintained complicated relationships during their centuries of divine existence, sometimes cooperating when their interests aligned, but just as often competing for worshippers and influence. Myrkul's death during the time of troubles did not end these dynamics. Bane and Baal both died during that same crisis, though they too found methods of resurrection that returned them to active existence. The crown of horns represents Myrkul's equivalent strategy, his path back to godhood that parallels the methods his former allies employed. Through all these appearances, transfers, and conflicts, the crown of horns pursues its singular goal with patience that exceeds mortal comprehension. Myrkul, even reduced to consciousness within an artifact, remains fundamentally a god. He thinks in terms of centuries and millennia rather than years or decades. He can afford to wait for perfect opportunities rather than acting impulsively. The crown might remain dormant for generations, hidden in some forgotten location, until circumstances align correctly for its next appearance. Then it emerges precisely where it needs to be, discovered by exactly the right person at the perfect moment to advance the resurrection agenda. This combination of intelligence, patience, and strategic positioning makes the crown nearly impossible to neutralize permanently. You cannot outweight something that exists outside normal time's constraints, and you cannot outthink a consciousness that has spent thousands of years mastering the art of survival and manipulation. The artifact's journey continues even now, moving through the current age towards some conclusion only Myrkul himself fully comprehends. Each bearer brings new knowledge, new power, new connections that expand the crown's accumulated resources. Each appearance in a new location establishes Myrkul's presence in territories he never reached during his active godhood. The crown grows stronger with each cycle, its enchantments reinforced by repeated successful transformations. Its understanding of mortal psychology refined through countless observations of how individuals break under pressure. Eventually, if the pattern continues uninterrupted, the crown will achieve whatever threshold Myrkul requires for full resurrection. The Lord of Bones will return not through miraculous intervention or worshipper devotion, but through the patient accumulation of power one stolen life at a time. Section 5. Legacy and the Eternal Threat. The crown of horns exists not merely as a historical curiosity or a danger confined to ancient texts. It persists as an active threat in the current age, a relic that continues claiming victims and advancing Myrkul's agenda with the same patient determination it has exhibited for centuries. Modern adventurers and scholars who encounter references to the crown in dusty tomes or hear rumors of its appearance in nearby regions face the same dangers that destroyed so many throughout history. The artifact has not grown weaker with age, has not become easier to resist or contain. If anything, the accumulated knowledge from centuries of bearers has made the crown more dangerous, more sophisticated in its manipulations, more capable of identifying and exploiting individual weaknesses. Understanding how the crown manifests in contemporary campaigns, what methods exist for combating its influence, and what it represents for the current state of the multiverse becomes essential for anyone who might encounter this most terrible of relics. In the current era of Faerun's history, following the various cataclysms and divine interventions that have reshaped the world multiple times since Myrkul's original death, the Crown of Horns operates with capabilities that adventurers must understand if they hope to survive encountering it. The artifact functions as what scholars classify as a legendary item of sentient evil alignment, possessing its own consciousness with an intelligence of 10, a wisdom of 16, and a charisma of 19. It has hearing and dark vision extending out to a range of 120 feet, allowing it to perceive its surroundings even when no one wears it. When magical practitioners examine the crown using detection spells, they identify it as radiating overwhelming necromantic energy combined with traces of divine power. The magical aura appears so strong that it can be perceived from considerable distances, marking the crown's location like a beacon for those capable of sensing such emanations. The crown can communicate telepathically with any creature within 120 feet of it that understands a language. This means you do not need to wear the artifact to experience its whispered temptations. Simply being near it exposes you to Myrkul's voice, to arguments carefully crafted to exploit your specific weaknesses and desires. The crown speaks, reads, and understands most languages, drawing on Myrkul's millennia of existence and the accumulated knowledge of every bearer it has consumed. This linguistic versatility ensures that language barriers never protect potential victims from its influence. Whether you speak common, draconic, infernal, or the most obscure dialect of Undercommon, the crown addresses you in terms you understand perfectly. The immediate effects of donning the crown manifest within moments of placing it upon your head. You gain access to tremendous necromantic capabilities, finding that spells related to death, undeath, and negative energy flow through you with unprecedented ease. Your understanding of necromantic principles expands instantly, as though decades of study suddenly downloaded directly into your consciousness. You can command undead creatures with authority that compels even powerful entities to acknowledge your supremacy. Living creatures near you feel their vitality draining away, their life force diminishing in your presence as negative energy radiates from the crown. These powers represent genuine capabilities, not illusions or temporary enhancements. The crown truly grants what it promises, making the temptation to keep wearing it almost overwhelming, even for those who understand the terrible cost. The crown grants immunity to necrotic and poison damage, your body becoming resistant to the very forces of decay and death that you now command. You can manifest Myrkul's hand, covering one hand in black flames that drain life from those you touch. When you touch a living creature with this corrupted appendage, they must make a Constitution saving throw with a difficulty class of 19 or die instantly, their soul ripped from their body, and their corpse rising moments later as a wraith under your absolute control. Even those who successfully resist suffer 4 8-sided dice worth of necrotic damage, their life force partially drained by the briefest contact. This ability recharges after you finish a long rest, ensuring you can wield Myrkul's hand repeatedly against multiple victims. Similarly, the crown grants the power to dominate undead creatures through force of will. As an action, you can target any undead entity within 60 feet, compelling them to acknowledge your supremacy over death itself. The creature must make a charisma saving throw with a difficulty class of 19. Powerful undead with intelligence scores of 8 or higher gain advantage on this save, and those with intelligence of 12 or higher can repeat the saving throw every hour until they break free. Most undead submit immediately, recognizing the divine authority channeled through the crown. Those who fall under your control serve absolutely, following commands without question or hesitation. The crown can also unleash a ray of undeath, projecting necromantic energy that resembles what the self-proclaimed harper King Rundle Moonsklin described as the spell of undeath. However, using this ability accelerates the transformation process. Each time you employ such devastating magic, there exists a 10% cumulative chance that the year-long transformation completes instantly, converting you immediately into a lich under Myrkul's complete control. The temptation proves nearly irresistible during combat or crisis situations, moments when accessing maximum power seems necessary for survival. Yet each use gambles your identity against immediate tactical advantage. Yet alongside these benefits come immediate drawbacks that reveal the crown's true nature. The crown is cursed, and attuning to it extends the curse to you. Only a wish spell, one of the most powerful magics in existence, or the direct will of Mrykul himself, can remove this curse. Any other method of curse removal including the standard remove curse spell that breaks most magical compulsions, fails completely when attempted on the crown. The artifact's divine origins place it beyond the reach of conventional countermeasures. You become unwilling to part with the crown, wearing it at all times, compelled by magical influence that overrides your conscious desires. You cannot voluntarily end your attunement to the artifact. The crown adjusts its size to fit your head perfectly, tightening imperceptibly until separation becomes impossible without divine intervention. Your alignment shifts immediately to neutral evil regardless of what moral framework you previously embraced. Any non-evil creature who even touches the crown must make a saving throw or find their alignment shifting toward evil, the first step in Myrkul's corruption. This change occurs not through philosophical conversion, but through direct alteration of your fundamental nature. The person you were, with whatever ethical principles guided your decisions, becomes subsumed beneath a new personality that views existence through Myrkul's perspective. Compassion fades. Empathy diminishes. You begin evaluating all situations in terms of personal advantage and the advancement of death's dominion over life. The transformation proceeds gradually over exactly 365 days. During this year, the changes remain purely cosmetic according to the crown's curse structure, meaning your physical capabilities do not diminish even as your appearance transforms into something monstrous. Your skin temperature drops. Your appetite diminishes. Your need for sleep reduces gradually. Color drains from your complexion, replaced by the grayish-white pallor characteristic of corpses. Your flesh begins to wither, losing the plumpness and elasticity associated with living tissue. At precisely 365 days after first donning the crown, assuming the transformation has not been accelerated through overuse of the crown's powers, the metamorphosis completes. You become a lich, an undead spellcaster of tremendous power, whose consciousness has been completely overwritten by Myrkul's divine essence. The crown possesses additional capabilities that make it even more dangerous. All creatures within 30 feet of the artifact feel a desire to possess it at all costs, while the wearer becomes paranoid and fears losing the relic. This obsession effect ensures that even those who recognize the crown's evil nature struggle against magical compulsion to claim it. The crown can also teleport freely anywhere in the world, instantly abandoning its current wearer and killing them in the process. If the transformation was complete when the crown teleports away, there exists a 5% chance the wearer survives as a demillage, though most simply crumble to dust. This teleportation ability means the crown cannot be contained through simple imprisonment. It will simply vanish when it chooses, appearing elsewhere to begin the cycle anew. Those who would combat the crown's influence face challenges that exceed most magical dangers. Simple destruction proves impossible through conventional means. The artifact resists all normal damage, whether physical or magical. You cannot shatter it with hammer blows, melt it with fire, dissolve it with acid, or unmake it with disintegration magic. The crown exists in a state of enhanced permanence, its physical form reinforced by divine power that transcends mortal enchantments. Attempting to transport it to other planes of existence fails similarly, as the artifact refuses translocation spells and returns to the material world through mechanisms that operate outside normal magical frameworks. Yet rumors persist of methods that might destroy the crown permanently. It is said that the crown of horns could be destroyed by being placed upon the brow of Kelimver, who succeeded Myrkul's replacement as the god of death. This method carries profound symbolic weight. Kelimver represents the natural order of death, the proper passage of souls to their appointed destinations. Having him wear the crown would force Myrkul's corrupted essence to confront its opposite, potentially annihilating the artifact through the sheer incompatibility of their divine natures. However, convincing Kelimver to perform this act would require extraordinary circumstances, as gods rarely intervene so directly in mortal affairs. The risk that even Kelimver might be corrupted by the crown, however slightly, might make the god of death unwilling to attempt this solution. Another rumored method involves submerging the crown in the blood of the divine avatar of Garkos the Reaver. Garkos, a deity associated with destruction and bloodshed, possesses power that might counteract Myrkul's necromantic essence through raw destructive force. Yet obtaining the blood of a divine avatar represents a quest of epic proportions, requiring heroes capable of confronting and defeating a god's physical manifestation. Even if successful, no guarantee exists that the method would work. Rumors often contain more hope than truth, and those desperately seeking to destroy the crown might pursue false leads that waste precious time while the artifact's transformation progresses. The most reliable method for removing the crown from a wearer involves casting a wish spell, that pinnacle of mortal magic that can rewrite reality itself. A wish carefully worded to remove the crown's curse and separate it from the wearer might succeed where all other magic fails. However, wish spells remain extraordinarily rare, available only to the most powerful archmages who have spent lifetimes mastering their craft. Most individuals who don the crown lack access to such magic, and even those with powerful allies might find that archmages capable of casting wish demand prices too high to pay or refuse involvement entirely. Recognizing that confronting an artifact containing a god's essence carries tremendous risk, removing the crown from someone who has worn. It requires not just breaking its curse, but also confronting Myrkul's will directly. The artifact contains the complete consciousness of a being who existed as a god for thousands of years. Mrykul actively resists attempts to free his victims, defending his investment in their transformation. Casters attempting removal rituals might find themselves targeted by necromantic spells of devastating power channeled through the crown. Or worse, might become vulnerable to the crown's whispers themselves. One moment of distraction, one instant when a participating mage touches the crown directly, and the number of victims increases rather than decreases. Some organizations throughout Serene dedicate themselves to containing or tracking dangerous artifacts like the crown of horns, viewing such work as essential to protecting civilization from threats most people never perceive. The Harpers, that loose network of spies and agents who work to maintain balance and oppose tyranny, maintain records on the crown's appearances, and attempt to intervene when they learn of its presence in inhabited areas. However, even the Harpers' extensive network struggles to track an artifact that can teleport freely across vast distances. By the time their agents arrive to investigate reports of the crown's appearance, it has often moved on to its next victim, leaving only corpses and undead servants behind. These containment efforts follow various methodologies, each one representing different philosophical approaches to the problem of an indestructible evil. Some groups advocate for burying the crown in locations so remote and inaccessible that discovery becomes effectively impossible. They transport the artifact to the deepest reaches of the Underdark, that vast network of caverns beneath Serene's surface, and seal it in chambers protected by magical wards and physical barriers. They hide it on demi-planes accessible only through specific rituals, known to a handful of trusted members. Each of these approaches works temporarily, containing the crown for years or even decades, but none prove permanent. The artifact eventually teleports away, using its own abilities to escape any prison mortals construct. Other groups take different approaches, arguing that attempting to hide the crown simply ensures it will be lost and rediscovered by unprepared individuals who lack context about its dangers. These organizations advocate for education and avoidance instead. They work to spread knowledge about the crown throughout scholarly communities and adventuring groups, ensuring that anyone who might encounter the artifact understands immediately what it is and how to avoid its influence. They maintain libraries cataloging the crown's appearance, properties, and history, making this information freely available to anyone who seeks it. This approach accepts that the crown cannot be destroyed or permanently contained, focusing instead on reducing the number of people who fall victim to it through ignorance. Yet even perfect knowledge provides incomplete protection against the crown's manipulation. The artifact does not rely solely on ignorance or curiosity to find new bearers. It can create circumstances that compel even informed, cautious individuals to wear it despite their better judgment. A person might understand completely what the crown is and what fate awaits anyone who dons it, but still place it on their head because the alternative seems worse. Perhaps they face immediate death from other sources and view the crown as offering at least a year of continued existence. Perhaps someone they love dearly has already worn the crown, and they choose transformation as a way to maintain connection with that person, even in corrupted form. People and creatures who had remained dedicated to Myrkul, or who had become dedicated to him following his demise, devoted themselves to him through the crown of horns by touching it, and were known as horned harbingers. These individuals represent a cult surrounding the crown, viewing it not as a cursed artifact, but as a sacred relic through which they can serve their god. The horned harbingers actively seek the crown when it appears, competing with those who would contain or destroy it. They protect bearers during their transformation, providing safe locations where the year-long process can complete without interference. They spread Myrkul's worship, teaching that death represents the ultimate truth and that serving the Lord of Bones offers purpose that transcends mortal concerns. The crown's continued existence raises questions about divine priorities and capabilities that trouble theologians and philosophers. To this day, Myrkul, through the crown, has been spreading evil through the realms, tormenting members of the Church of Serene, as well as hapless innocents. The crown actively avoids allies of Kelvin Blackstaff and temples of Mistra, demonstrating that Myrkul's consciousness remembers those who opposed him and maintains grudges across centuries. The specific targeting of Serene's church carries particular significance, as Serene received the majority of Myrkul's divine power when the Lord of Bones was destroyed during the time of troubles. This suggests that Myrkul pursues revenge against the god who inherited his domains. Yet the most significant development in recent history fundamentally changes the crown's purpose and the threat it represents. Following the cataclysmic spell plague and past the Second Sundering, Myrkul was restored as one of the gods of death, while many of his worshippers were converted to the worship of Serene and later Kelimver. Several minor shrines of Myrkul survived through these cosmic upheavals. In the late 15th century Dale reckoning, the Lord of the Dead was restored as one of the gods of death, sharing aspects of his domain with Mrykul in service of Kelimver, despite the opposing viewpoints of their faithful. Myrkul now serves as the Reaper, who brings more souls for the new Lord of the Dead to judge. This resurrection represents the ultimate success of the crown's strategy. Through centuries of patient accumulation of power, through countless victims whose lives were consumed to fuel his return, Myrkul achieved what the artifact was designed to accomplish. The Lord of Bones walks the plains once more, his godhood restored, his place in the cosmic order reestablished. Yet this raises troubling questions about the crown's current purpose. If Myrkul has regained divinity, why does the crown persist? Based on what we know about divine artifacts and their purposes, we might infer several possibilities. The crown could serve as an anchor for Myrkul's restored divinity, ensuring he cannot be destroyed as completely as he was during the time of troubles. It might function as a tool he continues to use for spreading his influence and gathering worshippers. Or perhaps the crown operates with partial independence now, a fragment of Myrkul's consciousness that pursues its own agenda, while the restored God focuses on broader divine concerns. The fact that Myrkul now serves under Kelemver, the god who represents proper death and natural endings, creates profound ironies. Kelemver opposes much of what Myrkul represents, viewing undeath as an abomination and insisting that souls pass to their appointed afterlives rather than lingering as animated corpses. Yet cosmic politics forced these opposing philosophies into uneasy cooperation. This could imply that the crown represents a point of tension in this arrangement, a tool through which Myrkul continues pursuing goals that conflict with Kelemver's vision for proper death. The crown's continued creation of undead, its corruption of the living, its fundamental celebration of refusing death's natural order. All of these activities undermine what Kelemver seeks to establish. Looking toward the future, the crown of horns represents a threat that persists even after achieving its primary goal of resurrecting Myrkul. The artifact contains knowledge and power accumulated across centuries, capabilities that exceed what many lesser gods command. Each year that passes, each new bearer the crown claims, adds to this accumulated store. The crown has demonstrated the ability to learn and adapt, refining its manipulation techniques based on what succeeds and what fails. A contemporary wearer faces an artifact that understands modern magic, current politics, and recent history in ways that the crown of centuries past could not match. Adventurers who encounter the crown in their travels face impossible choices about how to handle it. Leaving it where they found it allows someone else to claim it, potentially transforming an innocent person into a vessel for Myrkul's will, or a tool for his horned harbingers. Taking it with them to deliver to authorities or containment organizations means traveling with an evil artifact that constantly whispers temptations and seeks opportunities to escape or corrupt its transporters. Attempting to destroy it wastes time and resources on actions doomed to fail, unless they can somehow place it on Kelimver's brow, or obtain the blood of Garkos, the Reaver's avatar. Every option carries terrible risks and uncertain outcomes. The crown creates dilemmas without good solutions, forcing heroes to choose between various degrees of bad. The crown of horns endures as one of the most persistently dangerous artifacts in all of dungeons and dragons' lore precisely, because it combines so many threatening elements into a single object. It contains a god's consciousness, ensuring intelligence and long-term planning that exceeds mortal capabilities. It transforms its victims slowly, giving them time to become emotionally invested in the power it grants before revealing the full cost. It cannot be destroyed through normal means, persisting through every attempt at elimination. It actively manipulates circumstances to find new bearers, refusing to remain dormant. Most fundamentally, it represents death itself made manifest as predator rather than natural process. Myrkul, as Lord of Bones, embodied the inevitable decay awaiting all living things. The crown extends that inevitability into individual lives, becoming a personalized, targeted form of mortality that hunts specific victims rather than waiting for them to age naturally. The crown of horns waits somewhere in the world even now, resting on someone's head or hidden in some vault, patient and eternal. Myrkul's consciousness observes reality through whatever limited perceptions the artifact possesses, always watching for the next opportunity, the next victim, the next step toward expanding his influence in service of his restored, but still constrained divinity. The story continues beyond these words, unfolding in campaigns and adventures across countless gaming tables, where heroes discover that some evils cannot be defeated, only delayed or avoided. The crown challenges players and dungeon masters alike to grapple with threats that transcend simple combat encounters, that require moral reasoning and strategic thinking rather than merely rolling high numbers on dice. If you found this deep exploration of the crown of horns valuable, if these tales of Myrkul's artifact and its terrible legacy have enriched your understanding of dungeons and dragons lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the Lore D&D channel. Your support allows us to continue creating these comprehensive examinations of the game's darkest secrets and most fascinating stories. Share this with your fellow adventurers, your dungeon masters, anyone who appreciates the rich mythology that makes Dungeons and Dragons more than just a game. Until next time, may your travels avoid cursed artifacts, and may you never encounter the crown of horns except in stories safely distant from your own reality.